By noon, the bunting over Oakhaven's courthouse had gone limp in the heat. Red, white, and blue strips of cloth hung from balconies as if they had been boiled and forgotten. The brass band under the cottonwood tree had already played every cheerful march it knew, and the men in the back row were drinking from bottles wrapped in newspaper because there was less work underground than there had been the summer before. Mary Katherine Vance stood beside the general store with a crate of empty jars at her feet and tried to make herself narrow enough to disappear behind the porch post. 3 years earlier, she could thread a shuttle faster than anyone on the west side of the textile floor. She had been proud of that. Her pay had not been much, but it had kept a roof over her head after her father died, and she had once believed that being useful was the same thing as being safe. Then a steam line burst. The loom beside her bucked, a belt snapped, and boiling vapor swallowed both her hands before anyone found the valve. She remembered the sound more clearly than the pain, machinery pounding on while she screamed. She remembered the foreman staring at her bandaged fingers 2 weeks later and telling her there would be no place for her if she could not keep pace. The scars had healed badly. Some fingers stayed stiff in the cold. 2 knuckles ached before storms. Fine work that had once taken seconds could take minutes. Oakhaven did not forgive slowness. At first, church women brought soup. Then they brought advice. Then they stopped coming. By the summer of the Silver Jubilee, Mary lived in a narrow room behind Widow Finch's boarding house kitchen and paid part of her rent by scrubbing pots. She was 24. In another town that might have sounded young, in Oakhaven, where women her age were expected to have babies on their hips and flour on their aprons, 24 and unmarried sounded like a verdict. The crowd shifted in the square. Mayor Silas Thorne climbed the courthouse steps. He wore a cream vest despite the dust and a gold watch chain across his belly. 10 years ago, the sight of him had meant payroll, new shafts, fresh investors, and wagons lined with ore. Now the mines coughed out more rock than silver, and the town's main reservoir smelled faintly of eggs and metal. Silas still spoke as though prosperity were a matter of volume. "My friends," he called, lifting both hands. "Oakhaven has survived harder seasons than this." A miner near the fountain laughed without humor. Silas's smile tightened. He talked about discipline. He talked about order. He blamed drifters for theft, idlers for hunger, and unproductive dependents for straining the town relief fund. Mary felt the words before he looked at her. When his eyes found her beside the store, he stopped pretending. "Miss Vance." The square became quiet enough for her to hear a loose sign creak above the bank. She did not move. Silas pointed. "Come here," someone behind her whispered. "Lord have mercy." Another person snickered. Mary walked. Her shoes struck the hard street with small, flat sounds. She kept her scarred hands inside her apron pockets until she reached the steps. Then Silas told her to come up where everyone could see her, so she climbed and stood beside the clerk's table. Thomas Penworth, the town clerk, would not meet her eyes. A thick book lay open in front of him. Mary recognized the title embossed on its cracked cover. The Vagrant Marriage Act belonged to another generation, a law written in years when camps appeared faster than courts, and men with no property could be bound to employers or households under the language of public responsibility. No one had used it in Oakhaven during Mary's lifetime. Silas had found a use. He explained that the town could no longer maintain able-bodied dependents who refused or failed to contribute sufficient labor. He turned the language slowly, polishing it until cruelty looked respectable. Then he smiled at Mary. "Of course, we are not without compassion." A few men laughed before the joke arrived. Silas waited, since Miss Vance has had such difficulty finding a household willing to take on her. "Limitations, I have arranged one." Mary stared at him. A woman in a blue hat, Adelaide Sterling, who had once asked to see Mary's scars at a church supper as if inspecting spoiled fruit, covered her mouth. Silas drew out a rough iron ring. It had probably come from a piece of harness. Rust darkened its inner edge. "Her husband will be Elan Two Rivers." This time the square erupted. Men slapped each other's shoulders. Someone whistled. A boy shouted, "The ghost." Mary knew the name. Everyone did. Elan Two Rivers was an Apache farmer who lived beyond the White Flats north of town. He came into Oakhaven several times a year for lamp oil, salt, needles, and iron fittings. He did not drink in the saloon. He did not argue at the trading post. He paid in coin or produce when he had it, and ignored insults as if they had been spoken to someone else. That made the men hate him more. They called his ridge worthless. They called him a dirt sleeper, a heathen, a ghost. Silas had once tried to buy his upper spring rights for almost nothing, and had been refused. Mary understood the joke at once. Silas had paired the two people Oakhaven least valued and wrapped the insult in law. He held the iron ring over her palm. "Be grateful, Miss Vance. Even a poor match is a match." He dropped it. Mary caught it badly. The rough edge scraped a raised seam of scar tissue. Pain traveled to her wrist. The crowd wanted tears. She looked instead beyond the roofs, beyond the mine head frame, toward the pale ridge floating in the heat. A strange calm came over her. The town had spent 3 years teaching her that she had nowhere else to go. Now it was ordering her to leave. The thought was so simple she almost smiled. Hoofbeats did not announce Elan's arrival. He came on foot from the north road, leading a brown mule loaded with 2 rolled blankets and a wooden crate. The crowd noticed him in pieces, laughter moving toward the edge of the square as heads turned. He was taller than Mary had expected. Dust powdered his boots and the lower legs of his buckskin trousers. His black hair was tied at the nape of his neck. The sun had cut fine lines around his eyes. He did not hurry. When he reached the open space before the courthouse, he stopped. A drunk miner called something ugly. Elan glanced at the ground, crouched, and pressed 2 fingers into the dust. He rubbed the soil between finger and thumb, lifted his face to the wind, then stood again. The gesture unsettled the crowd because it contained no shame. Silas barked, "Two Rivers, up here." Elan led the mule to the hitch rail and climbed the steps. For the first time he looked at Mary. Not at her hands, at her face. His expression gave away little, but there was no amusement in it. Silas spoke loudly about responsibility and legal obligation. Elan listened. When Penworth pushed the register forward, Silas offered him the pen. Elan did not take it. "What does she want?" he asked. The question was quiet, but the nearest people heard. Silas blinked. "What she wants is irrelevant under the statute." Elan continued looking at Mary. No man in Oakhaven had asked her what she wanted in a very long time. She felt the iron ring in her palm. She could refuse, she supposed. Silas would send her to the county poorhouse, or bind her to a household as unpaid help, or find some other public way to make her small. She looked across the square at Widow Finch. The old woman's eyes were wet, but she stared at the ground. Mary looked at the mine offices, at the factory roof, at the alley where she had eaten lunch alone after the accident, because women who worked fast resented those who did not. Then she looked at Elan. "If I go with you," she said, "will I be free to leave your house if I choose?" Murmurs moved through the crowd. Elan answered immediately, "Yes." "Will you strike me?" His jaw tightened. "No." "Will you take my wages if I earn them?" "No." Silas laughed. "This is not a courtship." Mary ignored him. "Then I'll sign." For one breath, Elan's eyes changed. Surprise, perhaps, or respect. Penworth dipped the pen. Mary's fingers were stiff around the shaft. Her signature came out uneven, but it was hers. Elan signed beneath it. The crowd booed and clapped as though a comedy had ended. Adelaide tossed a handful of dry thistle heads toward Mary when she came down the steps. Others followed. Dead weeds caught in Mary's hair. A lump of dusty sage struck her shoulder. The band started a mock wedding march. Elan untied his mule. Mary picked up her small case. He did not offer to carry it. At first she was offended. Then, after half a block, she understood. He was not assuming she was helpless. He was waiting to learn what she could do. They walked north out of town under the full weight of the afternoon sun. Mary expected him to speak once the last houses fell behind them. He did not. The road narrowed to a trail across low scrub. Oakhaven's noises faded one by one. Piano, hammer, dog, distant stamp mill. Mary's case grew heavier. The leather handle pressed into her scarred palm. Sweat slid down between her shoulder blades. She began to resent Elan's long stride. After the trail started climbing, her breath shortened. He was 20 paces ahead when he stopped beside a black boulder. Mary braced herself for irritation. Instead, he waited until she reached him, removed his canteen, and held it out. He did not step close. "Drink." The water was cold. Mary swallowed too quickly, coughed, then drank again. Elan watched the valley. "How much farther?" she asked. "An hour if we go slow." "You weren't going slow. I am now." She wiped her mouth on her sleeve. His answer should have annoyed her. Instead, something inside her loosened. They continued. Near the crest, the land became whiter and harsher. Salt-crusted shallow depressions. Wind had twisted the cedar into low shapes. Nothing matched Mary's idea of a farm. Silas had told the truth about one thing. The ridge looked impossible. Then Elan led her around a limestone shoulder. A stone house sat against the cliff, not a shack, a house. Its thick walls were built into the rock itself. with narrow vents high under the roofline and a shaded entry facing away from the afternoon sun. A short wall sheltered a workyard. Bundles of dried herbs hung under an awning. Clay jars stood in orderly rows. Mary stepped inside and stopped. The temperature dropped so quickly her skin prickled. The air smelled of cedar, stone, and stored grain. There were no curtains, carved furniture, or silver dishes, but everything had been made to last. A stone hearth sat near the central wall. Shelves were fitted into niches. Water jars rested in the coolest corner. The floor was swept. Elan showed her a small room. A woven willow bed stood against the wall. A clean wool blanket lay folded at its foot. Someone had placed dried lavender beside the pillow. Mary touched the blanket. "Is this yours?" "No. Whose was it?" "No one's." "I made the room last winter." "For what?" He looked toward the doorway. "For someone who might need it." Mary studied him, but he had already turned away. That evening they ate beans, roasted corn, and flatbread at a low table. Elan did not ask her about the factory. He did not ask why she was unmarried. He did not inspect her scars. He ate slowly and listened to the wind. Mary finally said, "People in town say nothing grows up here. They also say I sleep in a hole." She almost laughed. It came out as a breath. Elan tore bread in half. "My grandfather lived on the lower ridge when I was a boy. He taught me where cold air settles before dawn and where water stays under stone. The mine men looked for metal. He looked for places that stayed alive after the metal was gone. You farm salt?" "No." He glanced at her. "I farm what the salt allows." Mary waited for a grand explanation. None came. He pointed with his chin toward the wall. "Sleep. We start early here." She lay awake for hours. The house made different sounds than town. No wagon wheels, no men shouting, no factory whistle. Water clicked somewhere inside the stone. Wind moved over the roof in long, soft pushes. Mary placed the iron ring on the small shelf beside the bed. She did not put it on. In the morning, Elan was gone. A bowl of water and a cloth waited on the table. Mary washed, ate a piece of yesterday's bread, and stepped outside. Without him beside her, the ridge felt larger. She walked the perimeter of the house and found narrow channels cut into stone. Some were dry, others held a trace of dampness. A path behind the house led beneath an overhang. There, in a shallow basin, water slipped from a crack in the limestone. It was not much more than a steady thread, but the stone around it was dark. Mary crouched. She touched the pool. The water felt slightly warm and oddly soft between her fingers. For years, the center of her right palm had been numb. She could feel pressure there, but little else. When the spring water covered it, pins and needles began under the scar. Mary jerked back. The sensation faded. She dipped her hand again. The prickling returned. "Hurts?" She spun. Elan stood several yards away, carrying 2 wooden frames. "I didn't hear you. You were listening to your hand." Mary frowned. He set down the frames, came closer, and knelt on the other side of the pool. "The water carries salts from deep rock," he said. "My mother used it for stiff joints. My grandfather soaked cuts here. It will not erase what happened to you." Mary appreciated that more than she would have appreciated a promise. What will it do? Maybe nothing. Maybe soften what is tight. Help blood move. Help pain. He offered his hand. Mary hesitated. He waited. That was what made her place her fingers in his. Elan lowered her hand into the spring. The prickling became stronger. Mary sucked air between her teeth. "You can stop." She looked at him. "Do you think I should?" "I think you should decide." She left her hand in the water. After a while the pain changed. It became warmth. Not a miracle. Not a cure, but a sensation where there had been deadness. Mary flexed her fingers under the surface. Elan released her. The skin looked the same when she lifted it out, only wet and flushed. Still, when she rubbed her thumb over the center of her palm, she could feel the rough whorl of the scar more clearly than she had the day before. Her eyes burned. She stood quickly. Elan pretended not to notice. "Come," he said. "You should see the nets before the sun climbs." The spring did not fix her overnight. Mary learned that quickly. The next morning, after several hours of net work, her middle finger locked halfway closed. Panic rose before pain did. She stared at the bent finger and heard the old foreman's voice telling her she was finished. Elan noticed from across the workyard. He came over, but he did not take her hand. "What happened?" "It won't open. Does this happen in town?" "In cold weather, sometimes after too much work." "Then you work too much." Mary's temper flashed. "I am not going back to sitting in a corner." "I did not say that. You were about to." "No." He fetched warm spring water in a shallow bowl and a narrow strip of smooth willow. Mary soaked her hand until the joint loosened. Elan showed her how to wrap the willow lightly along the finger while she slept so the scar tissue did not pull it closed. My mother's sister injured her hand with a grinding stone, he said. She worked until she could not hold a cup. Then she learned that rest is also work. Mary made a face. That sounds like a saying. It is not. You have too many things that sound like sayings. He tied off the cloth. Mary flexed carefully. The finger moved. Not fully. Enough. Relief made her angry at herself. I thought the spring was helping. It is. Then why this? Because helping is not the same as erasing. Mary looked down. The distinction settled painfully and honestly. She would not wake one morning with the hands she had before the accident. Some tissue would remain tight. Some days would be worse. Certain movements might never return. But a life did not require restoration to an earlier version. It required adaptation. Mary picked up the needle with her other hand. Elan took it away. Rest until noon, she glared. He put the needle on a high shelf. You said I was free. You are free to climb. Mary looked at the shelf, then at him. His face remained solemn for exactly 2 seconds before she saw the humor. You are infuriating, yes. At noon he gave the needle back. Mary worked more slowly. The stitches were better. They descended to a shallow basin on the east side of the ridge. Mary saw cedar poles first, then the webbing. Long panels of woven fiber stretched between frames in staggered rows. At that hour, a thin bank of cool morning air moved through the basin. Moisture gathered on the fibers and traveled downward into channels that fed clay catchments. Mary stared. You collect fog? Fog, dew, whatever the wind carries. There isn't enough. There is if you stop expecting it all at once. He walked between the rows, checking knots. Mary followed. Several panels had torn along their edges. One sagged where a storm gust had pulled the frame loose. Elan touched the damage. Wind took 3 last week. Mary reached for the torn weave. The fiber was tougher than thread but softer than rope. She separated 2 broken strands with her fingernail. This cross-lacing is wrong. Elan looked at her. She pointed. You tied every repair to the same line. When one knot slips, the load pulls the next. At the mill, we used a staggered lock on canvas belts. One break couldn't run. Can you do it? Mary nearly answered no out of habit. Her hands were damaged. Everyone knew that. Then she looked at the net. Large stitches. Strong fiber. Slow work. Nothing like the fine, frantic movement of the loom. I can try. Elan reached into a pouch and produced a bone needle and a coil of fiber. He placed them in her palm. No pity, no encouragement, only tools. Mary sat on a flat stone and began. Her first stitch was clumsy. The second caught. By the 6th, her fingers remembered more than she expected. She changed the repair pattern, alternating tension points. The scar across her thumb pulled and burned, so she paused. Soaked her hand in spring water, then continued. Elan worked nearby without watching over her. When the sun cleared the ridge, Mary held up the repaired section. He tested it with both hands. The strain spread across the weave. Nothing shifted. Elan nodded once. That will hold. 2 words. They filled a place in Mary that praise had never reached. For the next week, she repaired nets. She also learned how to shape clay around storage jars, how to cover shallow channels with flat stones so the sun stole less water, and how to plant below the salt crust where the soil stayed cooler. Elan did not romanticize the work. Some seeds failed. A jackrabbit dug up half a row. One afternoon, wind tore down a panel Mary had repaired badly. She sat in the dust staring at it. In town, she said, someone would tell me that proves I should never have tried. Elan handed her a new length of cord. What does the wind say? That my knot was poor, then make a better knot. She glared at him. He almost smiled. Mary made a better knot. Her body changed before she noticed it. She slept hard. She woke hungry. The ache in her hands came less often, though the scars remained silver and raised. Her shoulders lost their constant inward curve. Sun browned her forearms. She began humming while she worked. The tune came from the mill, but she slowed it until it matched the pull-and-release rhythm of the needle. On the 12th morning, Elan called her from the house before breakfast. Mary followed him to the garden. He pointed. A green hook had pushed through the pale soil. She crouched so quickly her knee struck a stone. The melon shoot was tiny, ridiculous almost. Mary laughed, a real laugh this time. She gathered small rocks and built a windbreak around the sprout. Elan watched. It doesn't need a fortress. It has one. He crouched beside her. The salt forces roots downward. So the salt helps? The right amount of hardship can teach a plant where water is. Mary looked at him. That sounds like something you practice saying. I did not. It sounds suspiciously wise. Then do not repeat it. She smiled at the sprout. Their first harvest was weeks away, but that green curve changed the ridge for her. Until then, she had believed she was helping Elan preserve what he had built. Now she understood they were building something new. 2 mornings later, Elan brought 3 new cedar poles to the eastern basin and asked Mary where they should go. She thought he was testing her. "You know this land better than I do. I know where I would put them." "Then why ask me?" "Because you changed the weave." Mary looked at the open slope. Pre-dawn mist still clung low to the ground, thin enough that sunlight had begun to tear holes in it. Existing nets stood in 2 lines, one near the rock wall and another lower in the basin. Elan handed her a strip of damp fiber. Walk, she did, at first. Mary felt foolish, moving through the cold air with one hand raised, waiting for a difference she could not name. Then she noticed the sensation from her factory years. In the mill, open loading doors created narrow currents that could tangle hanging thread before anyone else felt a draft. She stopped between 2 limestone outcrops. The air cooled across the wet skin of her wrist. Here, Elan stood 20 feet away. Why? The wind narrows through that gap. It does. Mary looked at him. You knew. Yes, you are testing me. No, you absolutely are. Elan picked up one of the poles. You found it. Mary followed him to the gap. They set the first post together. Elan used an iron bar to open a hole between stones. Mary packed clay around the base and checked its angle against the morning current. When they stretched the new panel, she changed the top row of knots again, leaving a slight belly in the weave instead of pulling it flat. Elan frowned. It will move. That is the idea. Movement wears fiber, rigid cloth tears. This is not cloth. It behaves like cloth when the wind is angry. He considered that. Mary expected him to insist. Instead, he said, we watch it 3 mornings. The first morning, the new net collected almost a third more water than the older flat panels. The second morning, wind came harder through the gap. Mary woke before sunrise because she could hear the panel humming. She and Elan stood beneath it. The weave flexed and recovered. Nothing tore. Elan reached up and touched the lower edge where droplets formed. You were right, Mary folded her arms. Say it again. No. I spent 3 years hearing what I could no longer do. I may require repetition. Elan looked at her, understood she was only half joking, and said more carefully, you were right. The words landed differently this time. Mary's smile faded. Thank you. Elan's hand hovered near hers. He seemed about to touch her, then stopped. Mary saw the hesitation. It moved her more than confidence would have. She closed the distance herself and placed her palm against his. His hand was warmer and rougher. Neither of them spoke. After a moment, Mary drew away and pretended to inspect the catchment. Her heart beat too hard for such an ordinary morning. At breakfast, Elan gave her a small wooden box. Inside were 5 silver coins. Mary frowned. What is this? Your share. Of what? The produce I sold in Red Wash last month. The improved nets increase storage. We will sell more. Mary pushed the box toward him. I eat here. Yes. I live in your house, our house. She looked up. Elan continued. You repair the system, you plant, you keep the food count. Why would the money be mine? Because husbands owned household earnings. Because that was how Oakhaven worked. Because Silas had announced Mary as property on a stage, and the law had agreed with him. She touched 1 coin. I don't know where to keep it, where you choose. I don't own a box. He pointed. You do now. Mary closed the lid. The 5 coins were not a fortune. They might have bought a good pair of boots and a bolt of cloth. Still, she carried the box into her room and placed it beneath the folded blanket. For the rest of the day, she felt its weight through 2 walls of stone. Not wealth, proof. She had contributed something no one could dismiss as charity, and the man the town had called uncivilized had been the first husband in Oakhaven's reach to tell her that her work belonged partly to her. That night she took the iron ring from the shelf. She did not wear it, but she no longer wanted to throw it away. Adelaide Sterling arrived on horseback near the end of the month. Mary heard the horse before she saw it. She was tightening a net when hoofbeats came along the upper trail. Adelaide appeared in a pale riding dress, coated with dust, carrying a wicker basket. For a few seconds, neither woman spoke. Adelaide's eyes moved over Mary's rolled sleeves, her sun-darkened skin, the neat rows below. I brought flour, she said. Mary looked at the basket. And dried beef. I thought you might. Might what? Adelaide swallowed. Need things. Mary remembered dead thistle in her hair. She also remembered Adelaide's laughter. But revenge felt strangely exhausting from up here. We have flour, Mary said, and meat. Adelaide looked toward the green rows. How? Mary pointed at the nets. Water from the morning air, a spring, careful planting. That land is salt. Yes, you can't grow melons in salt. Mary wiped her hands on her skirt. You rode 2 hours to tell the melons they're mistaken? Adelaide stared at her. Then unexpectedly she laughed once, not kindly, not cruelly. More like a person who had run out of ways to defend what she believed. Her face changed when she saw Mary's hands. Your scars. What about them? They look better. They work. Mary flexed her fingers. Adelaide's eyes dropped. The wells in town taste wrong. Mary's amusement disappeared. How wrong? Metallic, bitter. Silas says the drought has concentrated the minerals. Do you believe him? Adelaide did not answer. She looked again at the garden. The basket remained on her saddle when she left. That evening Mary stood at the edge of the ridge and watched Oakhaven's lamps come on. A bad smell rode the wind. Sulfur, chemical rot. She knew it from the mine yards. Elan came to stand beside her. The valley water is changing, Mary said. It has been changing. How long have you known? I stopped watering animals from the creek last winter. You never told them? I told Miller when he came to ask about a missing steer. He laughed. Mary stared at the town. She remembered gray liquid seeping behind the processing sheds during her factory years. Men dumping vats at night. Penworth carrying ledgers between the mine office and courthouse. Silas knows, she said. Elan did not ask why she believed it. He had learned that when Mary spoke with that tone, she was already several steps into a problem. She continued, the mine is uphill of the reservoir, if they're washing tailings into the feeder creek. The water below carries it. Mary smelled the wind again. Something cold moved through her despite the heat. Oakhaven had mocked her, discarded her, and sent her away. Children still lived there. Widow Finch still lived there. The women from the mill still washed clothes in that water. Mary said, I need to go back. Elan looked at her. No. The answer came so quickly she turned. You said I could leave whenever I chose. You can. Then why no? Because you said need, not want. Tell me what you need there. Mary explained about the storage shed behind the processing building. Old disposal records had been kept there when she worked at the mill. She knew where Penworth filed duplicate books because she had once cleaned that office for extra money. Elan listened. When she finished, he rubbed a hand over his jaw. I will go with you. You'll be seen. So will you. I can get inside. I can wait outside. Mary started to protest, then stopped. He was not ordering. He was offering. They left after sunset. The walk back felt shorter than the journey away, perhaps because Mary no longer measured each step against fear. Oakhaven looked smaller at night. Half the storefronts were dark. Dust had drifted against the doors of the assay office. The saloon still had music, but only one lamp burned over the entrance. They separated near the dry creek. Elan disappeared into the mesquite. Mary slipped behind the processing yard. The old storage shed smelled of hot wood, grease, and mouse droppings. She found the loose sideboard exactly where she remembered. Inside, darkness closed around her. Her fingers moved along shelves. Broken gauges, mercury bottles, paper bundles, then leather, a ledger. Mary carried it to a crack of moonlight. The pages were stuck at the edges with oily residue. She opened them carefully. Thomas Penworth's handwriting crawled across the paper in narrow rows. Dates, chemical purchases, reservoir measurements, payments to hauling crews. Then a line made her stomach drop. By order of Mayor Silas Thorne, diversion trench suspended. Tailings to remain in lower feeder channel until eastern investment secured. Another entry referred to complaints of dead cattle. Another noted discoloration in household wells. Another recorded a physician's concern. Each time Thorne had initialed the page. Mary turned back 3 years. The oldest entries began only weeks before her factory accident. The town had been dying long before the Jubilee. Silas had known. He had used celebration, speeches, and public humiliation to keep attention anywhere but the water and the failing silver. Gravel crunched outside. Mary froze. A shape filled the doorway. Deputy Elias Miller leaned against the frame. His face looked terrible. His lips were cracked. Sweat had dried white along his collar. He held one hand near his revolver but did not draw. "What are you doing?" he asked. Mary closed the ledger. "What are you drinking?" His eyes narrowed. "Put the book down." She smelled his breath from several feet away. Sour. Dehydrated. "You know the reservoir is poisoned. Put it down, you know." Miller took one step. His knee buckled. He caught the doorframe. Mary could have run. Instead, she watched a man who had laughed in the square struggle to stay upright. "Silas says it's mineral bloom," Miller said. Silas signed the dumping orders. Miller stared at the ledger. Mary reached for the flask at her belt. His eyes followed the movement. She uncorked it. The faint mineral smell of the ridge entered the shed. Miller swallowed. "This is clean?" Yes, he looked ashamed before he looked desperate. Mary held it out. "Drink." He hesitated. "You stole town property, and you are dying beside it." He took the flask. He drank so fast water ran down his neck. Mary let him finish half, then she took it back. Color returned slowly to his face. Miller looked at her scarred hands around the flask. "You could have let me drop." "Yes, why didn't you?" Mary slid the ledger under her arm. "Because I'm tired of letting Silas decide what kind of people we are." She stepped past him. Outside, Elan emerged from the dark. Miller saw him and flinched. Elan saw the flask in Mary's hand, then Miller's wet shirt front. Nothing in his expression changed. Mary said, "We have the proof." They began walking north. After a while, Mary heard another set of footsteps. Miller followed at a distance. Elan glanced back once. Mary said, "Let him." By dawn, the deputy had seen the ridge. He stood at the edge of the first green terrace with his mouth open. Dew traveled along the nets in bright beads. Water clicked into clay basins. Vines lay heavy over darkened soil. Elan walked past him carrying a basket of corn. Miller turned in a slow circle. "All this was here?" "Not all," Mary said. "We made most of it." "You have enough water for?" "No." He looked at her. "No, we have enough because we use it as though it matters." Miller's face tightened. "The town is nearly dry." "The town isn't only dry," Mary said. "It's poisoned." She held up the ledger. "And Silas knows." Miller did not ask for the book. He walked back to Oakhaven before noon. Mary watched him descend until he became a moving dot. Elan came beside her. "He will tell Thorne," he said. "I know. You gave water to the man who will bring him here." "I know." Elan was quiet. Mary looked at him. "Say it. I think mercy is expensive. That sounds like criticism." "It is not. What is it?" He looked down at the town. A warning about the bill. The bill came 2 days later. Miller entered Silas Thorne's office coated in salt dust. The mayor was studying unpaid invoices and pretending they were temporary inconveniences. Miller told him what he had seen. At first, Silas did not believe him. Then Miller described the nets, the spring, the melons, and the cool stone house. Silas stopped pouring whiskey. "Water? Clean water. How much? I don't know." Silas's eyes sharpened. Miller added, "The reservoir is poisoned. Watch yourself." "I drank from the ridge, Silas. My mouth sores cleared by morning. Down here my horse won't touch the public trough." Silas stood. "You will not repeat that." Miller looked toward the closed curtains. "Why?" The question was small. It frightened Silas more than accusation. He walked around the desk. "Because frightened people do stupid things. Like dumping tailings in their drinking water?" Silas went still. Miller knew then. Whatever loyalty remained in him thinned to almost nothing. Before he ordered the decree, Silas went to the reservoir. He took Penworth with him and told Miller to remain at the courthouse. The water had retreated so far that the old dock ended over cracked mud instead of the shoreline. Silas walked another 20 yards down the exposed bank before reaching the remaining pool. Heat held the smell close to the ground. Sulfur, rot, an oily mineral bitterness that coated the back of the tongue. Penworth tied a handkerchief over his nose. "You cannot keep calling this drought concentration." Silas stared at the water. Purple-black scum moved along the edge. A sparrow landed on a stone near the shallows, hopped twice, then dipped its beak. Penworth said, "Shoo." The bird drank anyway. It fluttered 3 feet, struck the mud, and lay still. Penworth closed his eyes. Silas kicked a pebble toward the carcass. "The whole valley is full of dead things. That is not an answer." "What do you want from me, Thomas?" "I want the dumping stopped." "The deep operation is already stopped." "I want people told." Silas turned. "And then?" Penworth stared. "Then they stopped drinking it." "And drink what?" The clerk had no answer. Silas stepped closer. "Do you think truth creates water? Do you think a notice on the courthouse door fills a well?" "No." "Then what happens?" "Panic, looting. Families leave before we secure a replacement. Investors hear we knowingly contaminated the reservoir. Credit disappears. The railroad bypasses us. Every property in Oakhaven becomes worthless by sundown." Penworth's handkerchief trembled. "Property is already worthless if the water kills people." Silas's face hardened. For a moment, old irritation rose in him, the irritation of a man convinced he alone understood consequences. "Men like you can afford clean consciences because men like me make the decisions." Penworth looked at the dead sparrow. "Is that what you call this?" Silas did not answer. He looked north. The ridge was visible through heat shimmer. Green lay against its flank. Green. Months earlier, he had imagined Mary and Elan struggling in dust until pride forced them back to town. He had pictured Mary thinner, Elan humbled, both of them proof that Silas's judgment had been correct. Instead, they had water. The humiliation moved inside him like acid. It was not only that they had survived outside his permission. He pointed toward the ridge. That is the answer. Penworth followed his gaze. No, they have enough to grow crops. You do not know how much they have. Enough is enough. You release that land. The municipality can reclaim strategic resources. You cannot manufacture title because you regret a bad bargain. Silas smiled. Watch me. Penworth lowered the handkerchief. For the first time in years, there was something close to disgust on his face. You made the marriage because you thought it was funny. Silas's smile disappeared. I made the marriage because the town needed an example. Of what? That burdens have consequences. Penworth looked at the water. And what are the consequences of this? Silas turned away. He climbed the exposed bank without answering. By the time he reached the road, he had arranged the argument in his mind. The ridge water belonged to the public. Mary and Elan were hoarding it. Taking it would not be theft but rescue. If the operation succeeded, he could close the contaminated reservoir, claim he had discovered a new municipal source, and present himself to investors as the man who saved Oakhaven twice. The ledger could disappear, the dead bird could become drought, the sick children could become dust. All he needed was paper, urgency, and frighten people. Those had always been easier to manage than truth. But Silas saw only the ridge. A source of water meant power. A green farm meant taxes, land value, investors. He had thrown Mary and Elan onto useless ground, and they had made it valuable without him. That insult became larger in his mind than the dying children outside. The ridge falls under Oakhaven's original mineral charter, he said. It was abandoned. Public necessity changes boundaries. Miller stared. Silas smiled. There are laws for emergencies. That afternoon he ordered Thomas Penworth to draft an eminent domain decree. Penworth's pen shook. You know the original claim was released, he said. Silas leaned on the desk. Then write around it. Sir. Right, Penworth wrote. In the square, Silas began speaking before the paper was dry. He told thirsty families that an Apache farmer and his wife had been hoarding water while Oakhaven suffered. He did not mention mine runoff. He did not mention the ledger. He pointed north and called the ridge a stolen public resource. Thirst did what mockery alone could not. Men who had laughed at Mary's wedding now gripped shovels and rifles because their children were sick. Adelaide Sterling stood among them, pale under her hat. She remembered Mary saying the ridge had what it needed. She remembered the taste of her own kitchen tap. When Silas raised the decree and promised water for every household, the crowd roared. That evening, Mary sat outside the cooling house with the iron marriage ring in her lap. She had carried it from Oakhaven without knowing why. Rust flaked beneath her thumbnail. Elan sat on the step sharpening a hoe. Mary rubbed the ring with sand and fat until dull metal showed through. Why did you agree? She asked. Elan paused. To the marriage. He set down the stone. Silas asked me 2 days before the Jubilee. Mary's hand stopped. You knew? I knew he wanted spectacle. And you said yes. Yes. Why? He looked toward the garden. My grandfather used to say that when the mine men finally emptied the mountain, the ones who survived would be the ones willing to learn a different kind of work. I thought I would do that alone. That doesn't answer me. No. Mary waited. Elan's gaze returned to her. I had seen you before. Where? Behind the factory, after your injury. Mary searched her memory. I don't remember. You were carrying scraps to Widow Finch. A man offered to take the bundle and you told him you still had hands. Mary's face warmed. I was angry, yes. That impressed you? Yes. She shook her head. Elan continued. When Silas told me he wanted to use me to shame you, I wanted to refuse. Then I thought refusing would leave you with him. You could have warned me. I did not know if you would trust me. I didn't. I know. Mary rubbed the ring again. Did you think I belonged here? No. She looked up sharply. Elan's mouth moved at one corner. I thought you might choose here. That was better. Much better. The ring became smooth beneath the cloth. Mary slid it onto her finger. It fit poorly, but she closed her hand around it. Elan saw. You do not have to wear that. I know. Then why? Mary looked at the dark shape of Oakhaven below. Because Silas doesn't get to decide what it means. A wind moved over the ridge. From far down the trail came the faintest orange flicker. Then another, torches. Elan stood. Mary rose beside him. Neither reached for the rifle. She went inside for the ledger. The first torch appeared below the lowest terrace, shortly after midnight. From the doorway of the stone house, Mary watched the light climb in uneven jerks. More flames followed it. Horses snorted somewhere in the dark. Boots struck loose rock. Voices carried up the canyon louder than they needed to be because fear often borrowed the manners of courage. Elan moved through the workyard, checking what mattered. He closed the gate to the spring path. He covered the open catchments. He loosened two of the upper net lines so a frightened horse could not become tangled if riders pushed too far into the garden. Mary came out carrying the mine ledger under one arm. "You're preparing the farm," she said. "Yes, not the rifle." Elan glanced at the Winchesters inside the doorway. "No. What if they use theirs? Then I will decide then." Mary understood. He would not allow Silas to make violence the first language spoken on the ridge. The thought steadied her. She tucked the ledger beneath a cloth apron and stood beside the stone threshold. The riders reached the last turn. Silas Thorne came first. He had traded his cream Jubilee vest for a dark coat, but the climb had defeated whatever dignity he expected the coat to lend him. Sweat shone on his forehead. Dust covered his boots. In one hand he carried a torch, in the other a rolled paper tied with red string. Deputy Miller rode behind him. His face looked older than it had in the storage shed. Adelaide Sterling had come too, not on horseback but in a wagon beside two families with sick children. Behind them were miners, merchants, a butcher, a schoolteacher, and men Mary recognized from the band that had played the mock wedding march. Seeing them together hurt more than she expected. Not because they were powerful, because they were thirsty. Silas dismounted. "This gathering is official," he announced. His voice bounced off the limestone. Elan stood 10 feet behind Mary. Silas's gaze went to him first. "Two Rivers. You have occupied public land and withheld a necessary resource during an emergency." Elan said nothing. Silas turned to Mary. "And you, I see Exile has given you ideas above your station." Mary felt the old reflex try to fold her shoulders. It did not succeed. She stepped into the torchlight. "What station is that?" A few men shifted. Silas smiled in the same way he had on the courthouse stage. "The one the law gave you." He untied the paper. "Under Emergency Territorial Authority, all springs, reservoirs, channels, catchment systems, crops, and improvements on Salt Flat Ridge are hereby placed under the administration of the municipality of Oakhaven until the present crisis has passed." Thomas Penworth stood near the rear of the group. Mary found him with her eyes. His face was gray. "Did you write that?" she asked. Penworth's mouth opened. Silas snapped, "This is not your meeting." Mary kept looking at the clerk. "Thomas?" Penworth stared at the ground. "Yes. Does Oakhaven own the ridge?" Silas stepped forward. "Public survival supersedes obsolete boundary records." "That wasn't my question." A murmur went through the group. Mary realized something then. Silas had brought them expecting obedience, not conversation. Questions were dangerous to him. She asked again. "Does Oakhaven own this ridge?" Penworth's hands tightened around his satchel. "No." Silas spun. "You coward." Penworth flinched. The crowd became quieter. Silas raised the decree. "The original title is irrelevant. Emergency power." "Emergency power does not turn a lie into a boundary marker," Mary said. Silas stared at her. She had never interrupted him in public. That fact seemed to offend him more than the words. He pointed toward the garden. "Those crops exist because Oakhaven built the roads and markets that supplied your tools." Elan finally spoke. "The cedar grew here." Silas looked at him with naked contempt. Elan continued. "The stone grew here, the water was here, the fiber was woven here," Mary added, "and the stitching was done by the hands you called useless." Several people looked at her fingers. In the torchlight, the scars were visible, pale against sun-browned skin. Silas's face darkened. He had expected the old Mary, downcast, apologetic, grateful for whatever cruelty wore the coat of charity. That woman no longer lived anywhere he could reach. "This is sentimental nonsense," he said. "People are dying." "Yes," Mary replied. "They are." She pulled the ledger from beneath her apron. Silas stopped breathing for a fraction of a second. Miller saw it. So did Penworth. Mary held up the book. "And you knew they would." Silas recovered quickly. "Stolen municipal records, mine records, property of Oakhaven, then you recognize them." His mistake was visible in his face. Adelaide took one step closer. "What records?" Silas waved her back. "Nothing relevant to tonight." Mary opened the ledger to the first marked page. The paper smelled of grease even in the cold night air. She read a date. Then an expenditure for mercury and leaching chemicals. Then the note suspending a waste diversion trench. She turned 3 pages. Another date. A report of dead cattle along the feeder creek. A physician's concern about metallic taste in household wells. A mayoral instruction to delay public notice until Eastern financing was secured. She looked up. No one moved. Silas laughed. It was too loud. You expect desperate people to understand mining accounts? No, Mary said. I expect Thomas Penworth to. The clerk closed his eyes. Silas said his name as a warning. Penworth opened them again. Mary held the ledger toward him. Are these your entries? He did not need to touch the book. Yes. Did Mayor Thorne sign the disposal orders? Penworth's throat worked. Yes. Silas lunged one step toward him. Elan moved. He did not touch the mayor. He simply placed himself between Silas and Penworth. Silas stopped. The difference in size was not enormous. The difference in stillness was. Elan looked like a door cut from stone. Silas looked like a man who had spent years mistaking noise for strength. Adelaide pushed through the men. My son started coughing blood in August. Silas said, The mine dust. You told me it was mine dust. It is. Mary turned the ledger. The physician's water complaint is dated July 19th. Adelaide's face emptied. She remembered Mary's visit. The basket, the green rose, the warning she had not taken seriously. My kitchen water went black 2 weeks later. Silas held up both hands. This is exactly why untrained women should not interpret technical reports. Drought concentrates natural minerals. Everyone knows that. Miller spoke from behind him. Then why won't my horse drink it? Heads turned. Silas's voice sharpened. Elias. Miller dismounted. His boots hit the ground heavily. He looked at the deputy star on his vest. I drank from the reservoir yesterday. My mouth tasted like pennies until sundown. I drank from their spring the night before and stopped shaking within an hour. Your personal weakness is not evidence. Miller's eyes lifted. No, your signature is. The words changed the crowd. Until then, Mary could feel their desperation facing two directions. They feared Silas. They feared thirst more. They had come ready to believe whatever story delivered water quickest. Now the story was breaking. A woman near the wagon began to cry. Her little boy coughed into a cloth. The sound was dry and painful. Elan looked at Mary. She nodded. He walked to the covered jar beside the house, filled a clay flask, and approached the wagon. Silas blocked him. That resource has been seized. Elan stopped. The mother stared at the flask. Silas continued, Distribution must be controlled. Mary nearly laughed at the word controlled. Elan did not argue. He handed the flask to Mary. She walked around Silas. He caught her wrist. The contact happened so fast she froze. For 3 years, unexpected male hands had turned her body to ice. Silas's fingers pressed directly across the worst scar. Before Elan could move, Mary pulled free. Not weakly, not by twisting away. She looked Silas in the eyes and removed his hand from her as if clearing debris from a table. Do not touch me again. Her voice was quiet. That frightened him. She carried the water to the mother. The boy drank. No miracle transformed him. His cough did not vanish. His hollow cheeks did not suddenly fill. But after several swallows, his breathing eased. His mother wet the cloth and wiped his face. The clean mineral scent moved through the torch smoke. People stepped closer. Silas backed toward the decree. This proves nothing. Adelaide looked at him. It proves you do not get the first drink. The sentence came from the woman who had once led Oakhaven's socials, and perhaps because of that, it cut deeper. Another miner said, My youngest has sores around her mouth. A shopkeeper said, We lost 2 goats after they drank from the lower trough. The butcher spoke of cattle refusing creek water. The schoolteacher mentioned children fainting during lessons. Facts arrived one by one, not dramatic by themselves. Together they became a wall. Silas tried to climb it with anger. You fools, without me there is no Oakhaven. I brought the investors. I opened the eastern shaft. I kept payroll moving when every coward among you wanted to quit. A miner near the front said, You kept us underground after the vein went dead. I kept your families fed. With poisoned water, Silas swung toward Miller. Arrest Mary Vance for theft of public records. Miller did not move. That is an order. Still nothing. Silas stepped close enough that their coats nearly touched. Your badge belongs to my office. Miller looked down at the star. He unpinned it. For a moment he held it between thumb and forefinger. Then he dropped it. The small piece of metal struck stone. Silas stared. Miller said, Then keep it. No one cheered. The moment was too tired for celebration. The crowd had climbed the ridge in rage and was discovering that rage had been pointed in the wrong direction. Mary closed the ledger. We can give water tonight, she said. Enough for the sick and enough for everyone to drink before they go down. Someone called, Go down? Another voice said, There's nothing down there. Mary looked at Elan. This was the part neither of them had planned. They had water. They did not have enough to waste. The ridge could not become Oakhaven's new reservoir overnight. If the whole town rushed the spring, they could destroy it in a day. Elan stepped forward. Listen, the crowd quieted. The spring is not a well you can empty and dig deeper. The nets gather slowly. The stone channels lose water if stepped on. The garden survives because nothing is taken without account. A miner frowned. We have children. So do the animals in this valley, Elan said. So do the families after yours. His bluntness angered some of them. Mary saw it. She moved beside him. If you want this ridge to save anyone, she said, then you do not get to use it the way the mine was used. Silas gave a sharp laugh. There, you hear her? She wants to rule you. Mary turned. No, I want you to work. Silas's smile disappeared. She pointed at the nets. Every family that takes water learns how to maintain a catchment. Every able person helps build storage. No one owns the spring. No one sells its water. No one opens a channel without counting what is left. The sick drink first, then children, then everyone else. A man said, And who made you mayor? No one. Mary looked at him. That is the point. Penworth cleared his throat. The clerk removed a small notebook from his satchel. What do we call the arrangement? Mary almost told him not to write anything. Then she remembered how many disasters had been hidden because only Silas's version made it to paper. Call it a water compact. Who signs? Anyone who drinks. Silas scoffed. This is absurd. Adelaide held out her hand for Penworth's pencil. I'll sign. The group looked at her. Her fingers shook as she wrote. She handed the pencil to the coughing boy's mother. The woman signed, then Miller, then the butcher, then a miner who had thrown weeds at Mary after the wedding. He stood in front of her afterward, hat in both hands. I was drunk that day. Mary knew what day he meant. He continued, Doesn't make it better. No. He nodded. I'm sorry. Mary did not tell him it was all right. It had not been. She simply stepped aside so he could carry water to his family. The ridge stayed awake until dawn. Torches were extinguished. Clay cups moved from hand to hand. Elan and Mary opened only one spring channel. Miller and two miners guarded the narrow path, not against an enemy, but against panic. Adelaide sat on the ground holding her son while Mary soaked a cloth and pressed it to the boy's neck. The child slept for almost an hour. Silas did not leave. He stood apart from everyone, arms folded, waiting for fear to return them to him. At sunrise he tried again. The first light revealed what torchlight had hidden. Green terraces, melon vines, rows of grain, nets strung over the basin like pale sails. People who had expected a crude camp stared at an agricultural system more orderly than anything in Oakhaven. Silas saw their faces. Desperation was no longer his. Wonder was. He climbed onto a rock. You are being manipulated. No one looked up. He raised the eminent domain paper. This decree remains lawful. Penworth said, No, it does not. Silas tore his gaze toward him. Penworth had been timid for so long that even he seemed surprised by his own voice. The statute requires verified municipal title or a territorial emergency order. You have neither. I am the mayor. You are a municipal officer. I appointed you. Yes. Penworth closed his notebook. I regret many things. Silas climbed down. He walked toward the nearest net. Mary saw the knife only when sunlight struck its blade. Elan started forward. Mary caught his sleeve. Wait. Silas slashed at the webbing. His knife snagged. He pulled harder. The staggered locking pattern Mary had sewn distributed the strain across 3 anchors. The net flexed but did not tear. Silas cursed and hacked again. The blade struck a mineral-coated cord and slipped. He lost his footing, dropped to one knee, and grabbed the mesh to keep from sliding down the terrace. For a few seconds, the thing he intended to destroy held his weight. The absurdity was almost unbearable. Mary walked toward him. Silas looked up. His face was red. You think this makes you better than me? No. She crouched and removed the knife from where it had caught. You keep asking the wrong question. What question? Who is better? Who is higher? Who owns whom? She stood. We are trying to keep people alive. Silas pushed himself up. You would have died without my order. Mary looked toward Elan. Maybe. Silas mistook her honesty for victory. Then she added, But that does not make what you did kind. His mouth tightened. You should thank me, no. One word. Nothing else. Mary walked away. By noon, the first families had made decisions. Some returned to town to collect blankets, tools, seed, and cooking pots. Others stayed to help. No one moved into Elan's house. That mattered to Mary. The ridge would not become another place where the most powerful person took the best room. They chose a lower bench for a temporary camp, far enough from the spring to protect it. Elan marked where latrines could be dug without risking runoff. Miller organized water turns. Penworth copied the compact 3 times and posted it on cedar boards. Adelaide asked Mary what she could do. Mary handed her a bundle of yucca fiber. "Can you weave?" Adelaide looked offended by the question. "Of course I can." She could not. Her first panel was a disaster. Mary sat beside her in the shade. "Not so tight. If I loosen it, it looks sloppy. It needs to move with wind." Adelaide tried again. The fiber bit into her soft fingers. She hissed. Mary said nothing. After several minutes, Adelaide asked, "Is this what your hands felt like at the mill?" "No. Worse?" "Yes." Adelaide stared at the red line forming across her finger. "I'm ashamed." Mary thought she meant the poor weaving. Then Adelaide said, "I used to watch you hide your hands. I knew why you did it, and I still stared." Mary tied off a knot. "Yes. I thought if your misfortune was your fault, mine couldn't happen to me." The confession sat between them. That Mary understood. Oakhaven had been built on that bargain. If poverty was a moral failure, the wealthy could feel safe. If injury meant weakness, the uninjured could pretend their bodies had made promises. If Apache knowledge was primitive, silver men could call themselves civilized while poisoning a river. Mary handed Adelaide the fiber back. "Try the loop again." Adelaide did. This one held. Over the next 6 days, the lower ridge changed. Not beautifully, not quickly. It looked like survival. Canvas shelters appeared. Stone circles became cook fires. Children carried small buckets instead of playing near the channels. Men who had spent half their lives underground learned that a shovel used carelessly could ruin soil faster than it could improve it. Elan taught without speeches. He showed. He dug one basin correctly, then handed over the tool. When someone wasted water washing a shirt in an open pot, he made them carry the next day's ration from the spring. When 2 miners argued over whose family deserved more, Mary put both of them on net repair until their anger had somewhere useful to go. Her damaged hands became an advantage no one had predicted. She knew how to teach movement slowly. A person who had once worked at factory speed might have been impatient. Mary broke each stitch into parts because she had been forced to relearn them herself. Pinch, turn, pull, rest the joint, set the tension. People listened. The garden expanded only after the water count allowed it. The sick improved when they stopped drinking from the town reservoir, though not everyone recovered quickly. The coughing boy, Adelaide's son Caleb, remained weak for weeks. Mary never pretended the spring could cure what poison had already damaged. A physician from a settlement 30 miles south arrived after Miller sent a rider. He examined the children, smelled a jar of Oakhaven reservoir water, and swore, "This needs to go to the territorial office." Mary gave him copies of the ledger pages. Silas saw the rider leave. For the first time, he seemed afraid of something beyond the ridge. He had moved back into his mayor's office after the failed seizure. Each morning he opened the courthouse as if Oakhaven still existed in the form he recognized. It did not. The saloon closed because the owner relocated his barrels uphill. The schoolteacher moved lessons to a shaded terrace. Widow Finch arrived with 2 chairs, a flour tin, and the boarding house cat. She hugged Mary without asking permission and cried into her shoulder, "I should have stood with you." Mary held the old woman. "You fed me when I had nothing. I also kept my head down when they hurt you." Both things were true. Mary had learned that forgiveness did not require editing the past. "You're here now," she said. Widow Finch nodded against her. Yes, that was enough for the day. Thomas Penworth remained in town longer than most. He spent evenings sorting records. One afternoon he appeared on the ridge carrying a locked metal box. Silas followed him halfway up the trail, shouting. Penworth kept climbing. Inside the box were original land releases, water surveys, chemical invoices, and letters from investors. He placed them on Mary's table. "I kept copies. Why? I told myself it was because a clerk keeps records." Mary waited. Penworth looked at his ink-stained hands. "Really, I think I was afraid of him. Keeping copies took courage. Not enough, no." Penworth accepted that. Among the papers was an original county document proving the ridge had been released from Oakhaven's mineral claim 21 years earlier. Elan read the survey boundaries twice. "My grandfather filed this." Penworth nodded. Thorne knew. Elan's expression did not change, but Mary saw his thumbstop on the page. Silas had not merely guessed the land was worthless. He had known Elan's family held legitimate rights and had treated them as disposable anyway. Mary reached beneath the table and took Elan's hand. He let her. They sat that way while Penworth arranged the rest of the papers. 3 mornings later, territorial marshals came. There were only 2 of them. No brass band, no torches, no speech. They rode into Oakhaven with the physician and a representative from the Territorial Water Office. By then, fewer than 30 people remained in the original town. Silas stood on the courthouse steps as if expecting the old crowd to gather. Instead, Mary, Elan, Miller, Penworth, Adelaide, and 6 others came down from the ridge to witness the reading of charges. Fraud, misuse of public funds, knowingly contaminating a public water source, falsification of emergency authority, attempted unlawful seizure. Silas listened with his hands behind his back. When the marshal asked for his wrists, he laughed. "You cannot possibly believe these people over me." The marshal looked at the box of documents. "I believe paper quite a lot." Silas's gaze found Mary, his face sharpened. "This is what you wanted." Mary stood beside the dry fountain, the same place where the Jubilee crowd had laughed. "No, you expect me to believe you came here for justice? I came because people needed to stop drinking poison." He leaned toward her as the marshal fastened cuffs. "You would still be scrubbing pots if not for me." Mary looked at the iron ring on her finger, then at Elan, then at the scarred hands she no longer hid. "What happened after your cruelty does not make the cruelty a gift." Silas's expression changed. For the first time he had no answer. The marshals led him away. There was no cheering. Mary was glad. A public humiliation had begun this story. She did not want another one to end it. As Silas passed the factory road, his polished boots kicked up the same red dust that had followed Mary out of town months earlier. He did not look back. Oakhaven spent the next week deciding whether it still existed. A place could not be carried uphill simply by moving its people. The mine was dead. The reservoir was unsafe. Most homes were too far from the clean water system to support daily life. Elan proposed salvaging what could be used and abandoning what could not. No one liked hearing it, especially the older miners. Their fathers were buried in Oakhaven. Their children had been born there. Mary understood. She had spent years hating the town and still felt grief walking through its empty streets. The general store smelled the same. The boarding house kitchen still had a scorch mark beside the stove where she once dropped a kettle. The factory wall still bore the faint white outline of the safety notice that had been posted after her accident, as if paper could make up for years of neglected valves. She stood inside the textile room alone. Sunlight entered through broken panes. The looms had been removed for scrap. On the floor she found a wooden bobbin. Mary rolled it between her fingers. The movement was easy now. Elan appeared at the doorway. "You want to keep the building?" She looked around. "No." Then she looked at the thick stone walls. "Maybe." He waited. "It stays cool," she said. "Even in summer." "Yes." "We need dry seed storage." "Yes." Mary looked at him. "You already thought of that." "Yes." She threw the bobbin at him. Elan caught it. A rare smile crossed his face. The factory became the first piece of Oakhaven they saved. Men removed the rusting machinery. Women scrubbed chemical residue from the floor using sand, ash, and precious measured water. Broken windows were repaired with shutters. The lower room, once used for acid vats, became storage for sealed seed jars. Mary worked there for 3 days without telling anyone what the room meant to her. On the 4th, Adelaide found her sitting on an overturned crate. "You all right?" Mary looked at the place where the burst pipe had been. "No." Adelaide sat beside her. They stayed quiet. After a while, Mary said, "I thought coming back here after everything changed would make it smaller, did it?" "No." Adelaide rubbed her sore weaving fingers. "Some rooms, remember." Mary turned that over. Then she stood. She picked up a broom. "Then we'll give it something new to remember." By autumn, sacks of blue corn and hardy desert grain lined the walls. The building smelled of husk and cedar instead of steam. Mary kept the old bobbin on a shelf above the door, not as a shrine, as evidence. Things could change use without denying what they had been. So could people. The settlement below the ridge needed a name. For weeks, everyone used different ones. Upper Camp, Spring Settlement, New Oakhaven. Elan disliked all 3 without saying so. One evening, Penworth came to the communal table with a territorial registration form. "Apparently, the government insists that places be called something." Miller said, "Put Maryville." Mary nearly choked on her tea. "No," Adelaide smiled. "Queen Mary's Ridge." "Absolutely not." Someone offered Salt Garden. Another person suggested Green Flats. Elan kept eating. Mary looked at him. "You have no opinion?" "I have several. Share one." He considered the bowl in front of him. "My grandfather called the 2 seasonal washes below us 2 rivers, even when both were dry." Miller laughed. "That's optimistic." Elan shrugged. He said a river is still a river when you are waiting for rain. Mary looked at the settlement, at the water channels, at people who had arrived in separate waves of shame and thirst and were slowly learning to share one future. 2 Rivers, she said. Penworth wrote it. No one objected. The name settled easily. That night, after everyone slept, Mary and Elan walked to the mineral spring. The moon made the water look black. Mary sat on the limestone edge and removed her shoes. Elan sat beside her for several minutes. They listened to drops fall from the fissure. Mary said, "When Silas grabbed me, I thought I was back at the factory." Elan's hand tightened once on his knee. "I saw. I wanted you to hit him." "I know." She looked at him. "You did? Yes. Why didn't you? You moved first." Mary put her feet into the water. It was warmer than the night air. "I'm glad." Elan looked toward her. "I am not always sure what you want from me. I'm not always sure either. That is inconvenient." She laughed softly. He touched the iron ring on her hand. "You still wear this, for now." "You polished it." "Yes. Why?" Mary watched moonlight move across the scars on her fingers. "Because I kept thinking about what you said. The metal was stubborn. I said it was stubborn. You also said it could survive rust. I may have implied that." She leaned her shoulder against his. It was the first time she had initiated that kind of closeness. Elan became very still. Mary nearly pulled away. Then his shoulder eased beneath hers. "I don't want to be grateful for being forced to marry you," she said. "You should not be. But I am grateful I married you." His breath changed. It was the only sign that the words had reached somewhere deep. Mary continued, "I need those to be different truths." "They are." She turned her hand palm up. Elan placed his over it. No ceremony, no witnesses, no law, just choice. Mary looked at him. "If you had met me without Silas, would you have asked? To marry you?" "Yes." "No." She stared. Elan's eyes warmed. "I would have asked you to mend a net." Mary laughed hard enough to startle a bird from the rocks. When she quieted, he said, "Then I would have asked you to stay for dinner. And after that? Depends on the net." She pushed his shoulder. He caught her hand. This time, when their fingers intertwined, Mary did not think of scars at all. By the time the first cold nights reached 2 Rivers, the people had stopped calling the lower camp temporary. Temporary things did not have stone ovens. They did not have a school bell hanging from a cedar beam or a shelf in the communal kitchen where every family kept one labeled jar of seed. They did not have arguments about fence lines, goat droppings, laundry water, or whose turn it was to clean the catchment screens. 2 Rivers had all of those. Mary found the ordinary problems comforting. A community fighting over a borrowed shovel was a community no longer fighting over the last cup of water. The ridge looked different under autumn light. The white salt flats still stretched beyond the terraces, but green no longer seemed like an accident there. Rows of grain moved in the wind. Melon vines had yellowed after harvest. New frames stood where families had built their own moisture nets under Elan's supervision. Adelaide could now weave a respectable panel. She made sure everyone knew it. One morning, Mary found her teaching 2 younger women beside the seed house. "Not like that," Adelaide said, taking the cord from one of them. "You're putting all the strain on one line. Stagger your anchors." Mary paused in the doorway. Adelaide glanced up. "What?" "Nothing. That look means something." "I was remembering your first net." Adelaide lifted her chin. "It was structurally ambitious. It collapsed while we were still tying it. Because the wind was uncivilized." Mary smiled and went inside. The old factory had become the quiet center of their food supply. Burlap sacks of grain sat on raised platforms. Clay jars held beans and melon seeds. Elan had designed vents that pulled cool air through the lowest stone room without admitting rodents. Mary kept careful counts in a book Penworth had given her. She had once hated ledgers. Now she understood they were like knives. A knife could cut bread or skin. A ledger could hide a crime or protect a winter ration. The difference was the hand using it. She recorded what came in, what went out, and how much seed could never be touched except for planting. When she finished the morning count, she heard boots outside. Miller stood in the doorway wearing no badge. Since Silas's arrest, he had refused every suggestion that he become constable. Instead, he repaired roofs, hauled water, and organized riders when someone needed medicine from the southern settlements. "Company," he said. "What kind?" "Polished boots." Mary closed the book. "That bad?" "Worse, government polished." She followed him outside. 5 riders were climbing the upper road. Their horses were taller and better fed than most animals in 2 Rivers. The men wore broadcloth coats, stiff collars, and hats that had not yet surrendered to desert dust. A 6th rider followed with measuring equipment strapped behind his saddle. Elan appeared from the terraces carrying a broken wooden valve. He studied the riders. "Did you invite them?" Mary asked. "No." "Penworth?" "No." Miller said the physician sent reports south after the Thorne case. Mary remembered the copies, so the territory knows. Apparently the territory owns horses. The lead rider dismounted near the stone house. He was thin, gray-haired, and tired enough to have forgotten the vanity of pretending otherwise. "Mary Katherine Vance?" "Yes." He removed his hat. "Edwin Harcourt, Territorial Water Survey." He glanced toward Elan and Mr. Two Rivers. Elan nodded. Harcourt looked down the slope. The expression on his face changed. Mary had seen it before. The exact moment when someone who had heard about the ridge realized rumor had not exaggerated enough. Moisture nets stretched across the basin in pale lines. At their lower edges, clay gutters fed covered channels. The channels carried water to storage jars buried in shaded pits and to planting terraces built only where the morning count supported them. Harcourt's surveyor walked 3 steps away from the group, stopped, and whispered something profane. Mary said, "You came a long way." Harcourt recovered. So did the drought. He explained that 3 counties to the south had lost shallow wells. Ranchers were driving cattle toward railheads. 2 settlements had already been abandoned. Reports from Oakhaven, now officially listed as a contamination site, mentioned a working high-desert water system built without pumps. "We need to see it," he said. Mary looked at Elan. He gave the smallest nod. "Then you will see the parts we choose to show you." Harcourt's eyebrows lifted. "We represent the territorial government. I heard you the first time." Miller looked away to hide a smile. Harcourt cleared his throat. "Mrs. Vance, Mary is fine. Mary, this technology could save thousands. Then you understand why we're careful." The official studied her. He had probably expected gratitude. Silas had trained Mary well in the dangers of powerful men arriving with words like public good. She had no intention of learning the same lesson twice. Harcourt said, "What are you concerned we'll do? Call it an invention, put someone else's name on it, sell the design, take control of the spring, move families here faster than the water can support them, or decide that because we survived, we owe you the right to ruin the place." The surveyor stopped unpacking his instruments. Harcourt looked toward Elan. "Is that your view as well?" Elan fitted the broken valve pieces together in his hands. "My family used versions of these catchments before Oakhaven had a courthouse." Harcourt's face reddened slightly. "I see. No," Mary said. "You came to see. That is different." For the rest of the morning, she led them through 2 rivers. She showed the officials the nets first. Not every detail, enough. The fibers were not magical. They worked because of placement, surface texture, temperature change, and patience. Elan showed how frames were angled to intercept pre-dawn air flowing down from higher ground. Mary explained the weave pattern that increased condensation without letting wind tear the panels apart. The surveyor ran a finger along one cord. "This is a modified canvas lock." Mary nodded. "I used something similar in textile belts." "You were trained?" "At a mill." He looked at her scars. Mary let him. She no longer mistook being seen for being judged. "The accident damaged your hands?" "Yes." "And you developed this after?" "I adapted what I knew before." He took out a notebook. Mary added, "Write Elan's family first." His pencil paused. "The placement, soil reading, channeling, storage, planting method, and spring protection come from them. My contribution is the net reinforcement and the accounting system." Elan looked at her. Harcourt said, "We can note joint authorship." Mary disliked the word authorship, but let it pass. At the spring, she stopped the delegation. "No instruments beyond this point." The surveyor objected. "We need mineral samples. You can have water from the public outlet. We need source measurements." "No," Harcourt said. "Why?" "Because this spring survived Oakhaven by being difficult to reach. I intend for it to survive us too." Elan pointed toward a small measuring notch carved in a downstream channel. "We monitor flow there." The surveyor knelt. He took readings. The numbers were unimpressive. That pleased Mary. The spring was not an underground ocean. It was a steady source protected by low demand, augmented by captured atmospheric moisture. The system worked because it respected limits. Harcourt seemed disappointed. "You cannot supply a town of 5,000 from this." "No," Mary said. "Then the reports were overstated." "No, your question was wrong," he sighed. "What is the right question? How many towns can build systems suited to their own land instead of all coming here?" Harcourt stared at her. Elan's eyes held a quiet amusement. Mary continued. "Two Rivers is not a reservoir for the territory. It is an example." By afternoon, Harcourt understood. The officials ate with the settlement at the long outdoor tables. No special meal was prepared for them. They received corn stew, flatbread, roasted squash, and slices of the last stored desert melon. The surveyor bit into the melon and stopped chewing. "This grew here?" Adelaide, seated across from him, said, "No, we import them every morning from Boston." He looked confused. Mary laughed into her cup. Adelaide looked pleased with herself. After the meal, Harcourt asked for the water compact. Penworth brought the current copy. It contained more than the first desperate agreement signed on the night of the mob. Now there were rules for household storage: grazing, waste disposal, spring access, irrigation expansion, and emergency rationing. Each rule had grown from an actual mistake. The waste rule existed because a family had dug a washing pit too close to a runoff channel. The goat limits existed because 6 animals had nearly stripped a young terrace bare. The planting quota existed because enthusiasm after the first harvest had almost doubled water demand beyond safe levels. Harcourt read slowly. "Who wrote this?" "Everyone who caused us trouble," Mary said. Penworth coughed. "She means the council. I mean both." Harcourt looked around. "You have no mayor?" Miller said, "We tried one." No one laughed loudly. Mary explained that Two Rivers used rotating stewards for food, water, building, and health. Decisions affecting the spring required a public count of available water before debate. "Numbers first," she said. "Promises second." Harcourt closed the document. "I would like permission to copy this." Mary looked around the table, not at Elan alone, at the community. That was another lesson she refused to forget. Adelaide nodded. Miller nodded. Penworth said, "With the source noted." Others agreed. Mary said, "You can copy it if Two Rivers and the Two Rivers family methods are named, and if the document remains free for settlements to use." Harcourt smiled. "You negotiate like an attorney. I negotiated with thirst. That may be worse." Before the delegation left, Harcourt stood with Mary near the garden gate. He glanced at the iron ring on her hand. "We heard a story in the capital." Mary waited. "That Mayor Thorne forced your marriage as punishment." "He did. And now you run this place with the man he chose. We don't run it alone. But you stayed married." Mary looked toward the lower field. Elan was repairing the valve beside 2 teenage boys, showing them how to smooth the wood. "Yes." Harcourt seemed to search for a polite way to ask a personal question. Mary spared him. "The law put us in the same house. It did not make us partners." "What did?" "Work choice. Time." Harcourt nodded. He put on his hat. "I hope the territory remembers the difference." "So do I." The riders left in late afternoon. Dust trailed behind them until the wind erased it. Mary expected to feel triumphant. Instead, she was exhausted. She found Elan at the spring path. "You let me talk all day. You are good at it. You could have rescued me. You did not look in danger. My throat is in danger." He handed her a cup. She drank. Then she sat on a rock. "What if they copy everything badly?" "They will. What if they blame us?" "They may." "What if Harcourt writes a report making himself sound like he invented wind?" Elan considered. "Then Adelaide will ride to the capital and frighten him." Mary smiled. "That might work." He sat beside her. Below them, children were rolling hoops through the settlement road. Someone hammered boards near the school shelter. A pot lid clattered. Mary said, "I used to think being safe meant no one knew I existed." Elan picked a piece of dried clay from his sleeve. "And now?" "Now half the territory may know my name." "That sounds unsafe." "It does. Do you regret it?" Mary looked at her hands. No winter arrived with wind. Not the gentle pre-dawn current the nets were built to catch. A hard northern storm struck the ridge one night, screaming through the passes and driving sand against the stone house. Mary woke to a snapping sound. Elan was already out of bed. Another crack came from below. "Frames," he said. They dressed without lighting the lamp. Outside, the cold hit Mary's face like water. Dark shapes moved through the settlement as people emerged with blankets, ropes, and lanterns. The upper nets were thrashing. One cedar frame had broken at its base. Another leaned dangerously. Elan shouted for everyone to stay off the lowest terrace where loose poles could swing. The wind tore his words apart. Mary saw a panel ripping along its center. Not one of hers, a newer weave. If it opened fully, the torn section could pull the next frame down. She grabbed Adelaide's arm. "Get 4 people to the western anchor. Do not pull until I signal." Adelaide ran. Mary took a repair coil and crawled toward the damaged panel. Elan caught her shoulder. "No, I can stop the run. The pole is unstable, so brace it." He stared at her through blowing dust. Mary shouted, "I am not asking permission." Something flashed in his expression. Then he nodded. 3 minutes. He and Miller wedged a timber against the leaning post. Mary worked. Her fingers went numb in the cold old injury stiffening the joints. For one panicked second, she could not make the needle turn. Factory memory returned. Steam, noise. The foreman yelling to keep the line moving. Mary closed her eyes. Not the factory. Wind fiber, 3 minutes, she breathed. Pinch, turn, pull. Rest the joint. Set the tension. She stitched a temporary cross brace through the tier. Now, she shouted. Adelaide's group pulled the western line. The strain shifted. The damaged panel flattened enough for Miller to tie the secondary rope. The frame held. Mary sat back in the dirt, panting. Elan grabbed her under the arms and dragged her clear as another loose cord snapped. They collapsed behind the stone wall. Mary started laughing. Elan looked furious. Why are you laughing? Because you said 3 minutes. It was 5. I knew you were counting. He put both hands over his face. Mary stopped laughing. Elan? He lowered them. I do not like watching things try to take you from me. The words were rough. She touched his cheek. The wind did not take me. This time, Mary understood that fear. She had lived inside it for years. Then next time you hold the brace and I sew faster. He stared at her. That is your comfort? Yes. It is poor. It's what I have. His forehead touched hers. Around them, people shouted over the storm and secured lines. By morning, 7 frames were damaged. No one had been hurt. Before the first sunlight reached the basin, Adelaide had already organized repair teams. Mary watched her distribute cord. The woman who once arrived with charity flour now scolded a miner for wasting good fiber on a lazy knot. Something warm settled in Mary's chest. 2 Rivers no longer depended on 2 outcasts knowing everything. That was how she knew it might survive them. Spring brought letters. Harcourt's report traveled farther than Mary expected. Copies of the water compact reached county offices. Requests arrived for diagrams. Training, seed varieties, and permission to visit. Mary answered some. She refused others. A company in the East offered money for exclusive rights to her net weave. She read the letter twice, then used it to start the cook fire. Penworth nearly fainted. That paper represented a fortune. Mary fed a stick into the flame. It represented someone else charging thirsty people for a knot. You could have negotiated public access. I did. With whom? The fire. Penworth sighed and sat down. Elan passed carrying a basket. She is difficult, Penworth told him. Elan said, yes. Mary threw a bean at both of them. The Territorial Water Office eventually sent formal papers recognizing 2 Rivers communal spring protections and crediting the 2 Rivers family system alongside Mary's reinforced condensation weave. The language was dry. Mary loved it. Dry language could be beautiful when it prevented theft. One paragraph recognized Mary as administrator of the local water compact. She read that part twice. Elan found her at the table. You look unhappy. I'm deciding if I hate this. He read the page. Administrator. It sounds like someone who owns spectacles. You could buy spectacles. I can see. Then it is settled. She pushed the paper at him. I don't want to become Silas with cleaner water. You will not. How do you know? You asked that question. Mary sat with it. Power had once looked simple to her. It was Silas on courthouse steps, a foreman with a whistle, a man with the legal right to command a wife. Now she knew power could also be a key to a storage room, a water count, a signature on a compact, or the ability to decide whose story entered an official report. The dangerous kind did not always announce itself. She began a habit. Every season, she put the compact on the communal table and asked what should change. Children were allowed to speak. So were newcomers. So were people who had disagreed with her the week before. The meetings took forever. Mary preferred that to obedience. The following summer brought one visitor Mary had not expected. She was checking seed jars in the converted factory when a shadow crossed the doorway. A man stood there with a bedroll over one shoulder. Amos Greer had been the floor foreman on the day the steam line burst. Age had taken weight from him. His beard was more gray than brown. The left sleeve of his shirt had been patched at the elbow. Mary knew him before he spoke because her body knew him. Her right hand tightened around the pencil. For an instant she smelled steam instead of grain. Greer removed his hat. Mary. She did not answer immediately. He looked around the room. Hard to recognize it. I recognize it. His eyes went to the place where the looms had stood. I heard there was work here. There is always work. Paid? Some. Some earns food and housing until a person is settled. He nodded. I can repair pumps. We don't use pumps. Steam fittings, very little steam, machinery. Mary held up a wooden irrigation valve. Can you repair this? Greer looked at it with faint contempt before remembering why he had come. Probably. Mary set it on the table. Show me. His face changed. I ran 40 people in this building. I remember. You want me to audition for a wooden gate? Yes. The old Mary would have apologized for the word. This Mary waited. Greer picked up the valve. One edge had swollen from moisture. He examined the hinge, borrowed a rasp, and trimmed too aggressively. Mary stopped him. That gap will leak. It's wood. Wood moves, yes. Which is why you leave enough swelling to seal. He frowned. You know valves now? I know water. Greer set down the rasp. Maybe I came to the wrong place. Maybe. He stared at her scars. Mary's skin crawled. Then he said, I should have shut the line. The room went very quiet. Mary had imagined hearing that sentence many times. In some versions she shouted. In others she forgave him and felt instantly free. Reality was smaller. What? Greer swallowed. The pressure gauge had been jumping for a week. I told maintenance to keep it running until the shipment was finished. Mary's fingers went cold. The report said the line failed without warning. I wrote the report. She had known, in the way injured workers know when truth has been cleaned for management, but knowing without proof had left a hole in her memory. Greer stared at the floor. If I shut the line, we missed quota. Thorne's people were already threatening to cut the factory contract. Mary sat down, not because she was weak, because her knees had decided the conversation required it. You chose the quota. Yes. And when I came back bandaged, Greer's face folded. I chose the quota again. Mary looked at the grain sacks lining the room. 5 years earlier, she had wanted someone to admit the accident was not proof of her worthlessness. Now the man responsible stood in the room where it happened, asking for work. What do you want me to say? I don't know. Do you want forgiveness? I don't know if I deserve to ask. That wasn't the question. Greer rubbed his hat brim. Yes, Mary breathed slowly. I cannot give you a sentence that makes what happened clean. He nodded. I can tell you what happens next. He looked up. You will work the lower maintenance crew for 2 weeks. Miller supervises. No one works alone on pressure tanks or storage gates. If you see a dangerous condition, you stop the job even if it costs us a harvest. Greer's mouth opened. Mary continued. If I learn you hit a safety problem to save time, you leave. You're giving me work? I'm giving you rules. Why? Mary looked at her hands. Because I built this place so people would not be discarded when they can still contribute. Greer's eyes filled. She raised one finger. Do not mistake that for forgetting. I won't. He stayed. For the first months, Mary avoided him whenever she could. That was allowed. Forgiveness, she discovered, did not require proximity. Greer became careful almost to the point of annoyance. He stopped work for cracked handles, loose stones, weak ropes, and once for a storage lid that squeaked in a way he did not trust. Miller complained. Mary did not. One afternoon, Nora Bell asked why old Mr. Greer checked everything twice. Mary watched him test an irrigation gate. Because he once learned what happens when a person does not. Nora considered that. Was it bad? Yes. Did he fix it? No. Mary looked across the terrace. He learned to do the next thing differently. That was the most mercy she could honestly name. It was enough. The first full harvest from the expanded terraces came in a year when the southern newspapers were still printing photographs of dead cattle. Two Rivers did not celebrate with banners. Mary had developed a permanent suspicion of banners. Instead, every household brought one dish to the long tables below the seed house. There were roasted melons glazed with mesquite syrup, blue corn cakes, beans cooked with dried peppers, squash, rabbit stew, and 3 pies Widow Finch insisted counted as essential frontier nutrition. Caleb Sterling carried one of the pies. He was thinner than other boys his age and still coughed when he ran too hard, but he no longer had blood on his handkerchief. Adelaide watched him cross the yard. Mary stood beside her. He looks better. He is, Adelaide's voice changed. The doctor says some damage may stay. Mary did not offer false reassurance. Adelaide appreciated that now. He is alive, she said. Yes. They watched Caleb steal a piece of crust. Adelaide caught him. He grinned and ran. She let him. At sunset, Penworth tapped a cup with a spoon. Everyone groaned. I have been instructed to say very little. Mary called from the table, by me. That instruction arrived with no legal authority. Thomas, he smiled. I will be brief. He held up a sheet of paper. The Territorial Office confirmed today that the Two Rivers Water Compact has been accepted as a model agreement for drought settlements. More importantly, the first outside community using our plans reported that its catchments are producing enough water to keep their school and clinic open. For a moment, no one reacted. The news had traveled too far beyond their daily concerns to feel real. Then Miller began clapping. Others joined. Mary looked at Elan. He sat at the end of the table with his hands folded. His face remained composed, but his eyes lowered. She knew him well enough to recognize emotion in the places he hid it. Penworth continued. The report names the Two Rivers family catchment system and Mary Vance Two Rivers reinforced weave. Elan looked up. Mary saw his throat move. That mattered more than the applause. His grandfather's knowledge had spent decades being mocked, ignored, or treated as something settlers could copy without credit. Now it sat in a government record. A dry line of ink, a small correction. Not enough to repair history, enough to prevent one more erasure. Later, after the tables were cleared, Mary found Elan alone near the upper nets. You left your own celebration. I do not like speeches. It was one speech, one too many. She stood beside him. You heard the name? Yes, your grandfather's family. Yes, Mary waited. Elan rubbed a fiber between his fingers. He would have complained about the spelling. She laughed. Was it wrong? No. Then what would he complain about? Something. They stood in the dark. Music started below. Not a band. A fiddle and a hand drum. Children danced badly. Adults danced worse. Mary said did not move. You want to dance? No. Good. Mary looked toward the lights. Then she reached for his hand. But I want to stand near people who are. They returned together. No one announced them. No one made space as though they were royalty. They carried dirty plates, moved benches, and ate the last pieces of corn cake. At some point, Nora Bell climbed onto a barrel and declared that the settlement needed a holiday. Mary shouted, "No jubilees." Nora shouted back, "What is a jubilee?" The adults laughed. Mary realized the child truly did not know. The word that had once contained one of the worst days of her life meant nothing to the next generation. She liked that. What should we call it? Nora asked. Miller suggested Water Day. Adelaide rejected it as dull. Widowfinch proposed Harvest Supper. Elan said, "We are already eating supper." Nora put both hands on her hips. "You are not helpful." Mary laughed until her sides hurt. They never agreed on a name. The next year they held the meal again anyway. One evening, months after the territorial recognition, she removed the iron ring. The skin beneath it was pale. Elan noticed immediately. "You are done with it?" "I think so. Throw it in the gorge." Mary rolled the ring across her palm. "I considered that." She carried it outside. The main garden gate had developed a problem. Wind worked the wooden latch loose unless a stone was wedged beneath it. Mary fetched a hammer, an iron spike in the ring. Elan leaned against the wall. "What are you doing?" "Improving your gate. My gate worked for years. Your gate requires a rock. The rock is reliable. The rock is irritating." She positioned the iron ring against the cedar post and drove the spike through its center. 3 hard blows. Metal rang through the yard. Mary adjusted the wooden bar until it slid neatly through the ring. She tested it. Click held again. Click held. Elan touched the latch. "You made the marriage ring into hardware." "It began as hardware." He looked at her. Mary smiled. "Silas only borrowed it for theater." Elan opened and closed the gate. "Good hinge, latch, good latch." Mary put the hammer away. The next morning she passed through the gate without anything on her ring finger. She did not feel unmarried. She felt chosen. Later that year, she and Elan returned to the courthouse square. The building had been reopened, not as a mayor's office but as a clinic and record house. The fountain remained dry because no one wanted to pipe precious water into decoration. Mary approved. Penworth had asked them to sign a new civil document, not because the old forced marriage had been invalidated. It remained a legal fact tangled in laws the territory was now considering repealing, but because both of them wanted a record of consent. Mary had suggested doing it quietly. Adelaide had somehow heard. By the time they arrived, 20 people were waiting. Mary stopped in the street. "No." Adelaide smiled sweetly. "What? You did this?" "I mentioned it." "To whom?" "People. All of them?" "Apparently." Miller stood beside the courthouse door holding a bunch of sage tied with string. He looked embarrassed. Widow Finch had baked a small corn cake. Children sat on the steps. Mary turned to Elan. "We can leave." He considered the crowd. "You want to?" She looked at the people. No one was laughing. No band. No dead weeds. No mayor. Only neighbors waiting without a legal right to demand anything from her. Mary exhaled, "No." Inside, Penworth opened a clean ledger. His new handwriting was steadier. He read the document. It was short. Mary Katherine Vance and Elan Two Rivers, of their own will, recognized one another as partners in household, work, property, and care, each retaining the right to property, wages, and movement. Mary had insisted on those last words. Penworth asked if she agreed. Mary looked at Elan. I do. Elan answered the same. There was no ring. When Penworth offered the pen, Mary signed without difficulty. Her letters were even. She noticed. So did Elan. Outside, Widow Finch cut the corn cake. Adelaide cried more than necessary. Miller pretended dust was in his eye. A child asked why there was no wedding music. Mary said, "We already had enough for 2 weddings." People laughed. This time she laughed with them. Years passed without asking permission. 2 rivers spread carefully along the lower terraces. The settlement never became large. That was deliberate. When the water count said no more houses, new families were helped to study nearby land and build smaller systems of their own. Some failed and came back for advice. Some succeeded. A chain of high desert communities began using variations of the catchment weave. No 2 were identical. One valley used stone towers to condense night air. Another hung nets along a canyon wall. Ranchers built covered cisterns instead of open troughs. The territorial government eventually prohibited mine tailings within protected watersheds, a rule written in language so boring that Mary considered it one of the finest things she had ever read. Silas Thorne's name appeared in the legal record only as a caution. His trial took place in the capital. Mary testified once. She wore a plain dress and kept her hands on the witness rail where everyone could see them. Silas sat across the room in a dark suit. He looked smaller. The prosecutor asked Mary about the Vagrant Marriage Act, the poisoned water, the attempted seizure, and the ledger. Silas's attorney tried to imply she had benefited from the mayor's decisions. "Mrs. Two Rivers," he said, "is it not true that your present prosperity arose only because Mayor Thorne arranged your relocation to Salt Flat Ridge?" Mary looked at the jury. "My prosperity arose because we worked. But without his order, you would not have been there. Without the factory accident, I would not have learned how to repair the nets either." The attorney paused. Mary continued. "That does not mean I thank the burst pipe." A juror looked down to hide a reaction. The attorney changed direction. Silas was convicted on the financial and contamination charges. The illegal seizure count became part of a larger review of territorial emergency laws. Mary did not attend sentencing. She had irrigation gates to inspect. 5 years after the Jubilee, a girl named Nora Bell arrived at Two Rivers with her parents and 2 younger brothers. Their wagon had lost a wheel 3 miles south of the settlement. By the time Miller brought them in, Nora's face was coated with dust except for 2 clean tracks under her eyes. She was 9. Her family had left a ranch after their well collapsed. Mary met them at the communal kitchen. Nora stared at her hands. Children did that. Adults tried not to. Mary preferred children. "What happened?" Nora asked. "Nora, it's all right." Mary held out her hands. "Steam burned them when I was younger." "Did it hurt?" "Yes." "Do they still hurt?" "Sometimes." Nora examined the pale lines. "They look silver." Mary smiled. "That is better than what people used to call them." "What did they call them?" Her mother said, "Nora." Mary spared the woman broken. Nora frowned. "But they're not broken." "No. How do you know?" Mary picked up the basket of torn netting beside her. "Because they have work to do." Nora considered this with the seriousness children reserve for answers that might become part of their world. "Can I learn?" "To do what?" That she pointed to the net. Mary sat on the low wall. "Come here." Nora climbed beside her. Mary gave her a blunt needle. The girl gripped it like a weapon. "Looser." Nora loosened. Mary guided the cord. Pinch, turn, pull. Nora's first loop was terrible. Mary did not tell her. The second was better. On the third, Nora stuck her tongue out in concentration. Elan passed carrying a hoe. He stopped. Mary looked up. "You have another net worker." Elan inspected the girl's stitching. Nora waited anxiously. He said, "The first knot will fail." Her face fell. Mary elbowed him. Elan added, "The third may hold." Nora brightened. "Really?" "Yes." He walked on. Nora whispered, "Is he always like that?" "Yes." "Does he ever say nice things?" That Nora's eyes widened. Mary laughed. That evening, after the Bell family had been given a place in the guest shelter, Mary walked the upper terraces. The ridge at sunset still surprised her. Nothing about the desert had become gentle. The heat could kill. Wind could destroy a month of work in an hour. Water remained scarce. A careless season could undo careful years. Mary loved it because it never promised otherwise. Below, Two Rivers prepared for night. Smoke rose from cooking fires. The school bell rang once to call children home. Someone sang near the seed house. Mary recognized the melody, the old mill song. She had taught it to Adelaide years earlier while they repaired nets, and Adelaide had taught it to everyone else without remembering where it came from. The tempo was slow now. No machine drove it. Mary followed the stone path to the garden gate. Her hand touched the iron latch. Rust had begun to return along one edge. She rubbed it with her thumb. The metal had outlived its insult. She opened the gate. Elan waited beyond it with 2 cups of tea. "You are late." "I was teaching Nora Bell. I saw. She has good hands. She has impatient hands. So did I. You still do." Mary accepted the cup. They walked to the high ledge. The settlement spread below them in amber light. Farther south, Oakhaven's old mine headframe remained visible against the sky, a black skeleton nobody had bothered to tear down. Mary no longer needed it gone. The past did not become harmless because a person refused to look at it. It became smaller when it was no longer the only thing on the horizon. Elan sat. Mary lowered herself beside him. For a while they drank in silence. Then Elan said, "Harcourt sent another letter." Mary groaned. "What now? A county wants you to speak at a water meeting." "No. I told Penworth you would say that." "Good. He already accepted." Mary turned. "What?" Elan's face remained completely calm. She stared until she saw the faintest betrayal at the corner of his mouth. "You're lying." "Yes." Mary shoved him with her shoulder. He barely moved. "You have become troublesome. I learned from an administrator." Mary looked at her hands around the cup. The scars had faded over the years, but they had not disappeared. She was glad. For a time she had wanted smooth skin more than almost anything. She had dreamed of waking with no evidence of the accident. Now the idea felt like erasing a road from a map, simply because the journey had been difficult. She flexed her fingers. They were strong, not perfect. Strong. "Do you remember the first day?" she asked. "Yes, you barely spoke. You spoke enough for both of us. I asked if you would hit me." Elan's jaw tightened at the memory. "I remember. I thought you were taking me to a shack. You insulted my house before seeing it? Silently, that is still insult." "I apologized to the house. Accepted." Mary smiled. After a moment she said, "Were you afraid? At the courthouse?" "Yes." Elan took longer to answer. "I was angry. That isn't what I asked." He looked over the valley. "Yes." Mary waited. "Of what?" "That you would look at me and see what they told you to see." The answer hurt in a place she had never considered. She had spent so much of those first days fearing his judgment that she had not imagined his fear of hers. "What did they tell me to see?" "A man who would make your punishment complete." Mary set down her cup. She took his hand. "I'm sorry. You did not do it. I believed some of it. You had no reason not to. I do now." Elan turned his palm beneath hers. They stayed like that until the sun touched the far mountains. Below them children ran along the lower path. Nora Bell's voice carried upward. "Mary!" The knot held. Mary stood and shouted back, "Which one?" "The third." Elan nodded. "I said it would." Mary looked down at him. "You are going to be unbearable about this." "Yes." She laughed. The years had changed the sound. In Oakhaven, laughter had once been a weapon aimed at her. At Two Rivers it moved across the terraces and returned as something shared. Nora ran toward the gate waving a scrap of repaired netting. Mary went down to meet her. The girl held up the work. The first knot had indeed failed. The third held firm. Mary touched it. "Better." Nora stared at Mary's hands again, but now with interest rather than pity. "Will mine get like yours if I work a lot?" Mary considered. "I hope yours become exactly like yours." The girl seemed dissatisfied. "I want strong ones, then use them." Nora nodded as if Mary had handed her a secret. She ran back toward the other children. Mary watched her go. Adelaide came up the path, carrying a basket of dried sage. "She worships you." "She met me this morning." Children are efficient. Mary took half the basket. Adelaide glanced at the iron ring on the gate. "You know, I still remember that day." "So do I. I can hear the crowd sometimes." Mary looked toward the setting sun. "Can you?" "Yes." Adelaide swallowed. "I was awful." "You were. I keep hoping one day you'll tell me I've apologized enough." Mary shifted the basket. "Would that help?" "Probably not. Then I won't." Adelaide laughed weakly. Mary touched her arm. "You're not the woman you were." Adelaide's eyes filled. Mary continued before she could become dramatic. "Also, you still pull the left side of your weave too tight." Adelaide wiped her face with the back of her wrist. "There she is." They carried the sage to the drying shed. By dark, the ridge smelled sharp and clean. Mary returned to the gate alone. She lifted the wooden bar from the old iron ring. The latch showed wear now, polished smooth where years of hands had touched it. Silas had intended the circle to announce that she was worth no more than scrap. He had been correct about one part. It had been scrap. Its value had never been in what it was, only in what someone chose to do with it. Mary closed the gate. The latch settled with a solid click. Beyond it stood a house cut into cool stone, a man who had never asked her to hide her hands, a settlement fed by water no one owned, and terraces built by people who had once mistaken silver for security. She did not call it a kingdom. That word belonged to men like Silas. She called it home. Elan had left the door open. Warm lamplight fell across the yard. Mary walked toward it, her boots carrying a little ridge dust inside, the way they always did. She no longer apologized for that either.